Pearse, you also join? Yeah. All right, so my name is Olivier Bringer. I'm the Deputy and Acting Head of Unit in charge of the Next Generation Internet Initiative in the Commission. So thanks a lot, Monique, for the organization and for organizing this panel. I think we had a very wide view on the different building blocks of what the Next Generation Internet could be. So we will use Slido, but before that I will ask a few questions. So as I told the panelists, I did not prepare the question beforehand because I knew there would be a lot of interesting points that would be raised during the discussion, and it indeed happened. So I would have a first question. NGI is a very noble goal. I mean, we want to build an internet of humans. We want to build an internet that takes into account human needs, that maximizes the benefits for society. And we want to develop technologies to do that. However, these technologies, they will have to survive market test. It will not be sufficient to say that this technology safeguards privacy or is secure. We will need to make sure that it is taken up by the market. So, Manuel, you raised the point, a very interesting point of differential privacy, which links to me with privacy by design. And it's not an easy thing, I guess, to incorporate a value or now a norm in Europe into technology, a value like privacy by design. So I would like to ask you, but also others, what do you see as the main drivers to promote privacy by design? Is it the regulation? Is it the fact that we have GDPR in place? Is it the demand? Is it the supply? How can we stimulate that? And maybe, Susana, you could tell us how you have done that in the networks that you have built here in Porto, because privacy was surely a matter of concern. And then, sorry for the very long question, I would have a third part, which would be for Virginia. I would ask the same questions for artificial intelligence and ethics. How do we make sure that we develop ethical artificial intelligence and algorithm? So, Manuel, do you want to start? I have to share.
Sure. If someone else wants to chime in, please. So, about your question, I always think that the main driver comes from the market, from the demand. And we have seen this very recently with an example with what happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. So suddenly all the lights were on data privacy. What do I do to protect my data? And people started looking at the market to see who's out there that can help me. So, you have an offer of different technologies, and one of several of them are going to be the winner. And I think that the public organizations have more of a role of steering that into the right direction, but the main driver always comes from the market. I believe on bottom-up approaches, mainly because I'm on a startup, I guess.
Thank you, Olivier. So I can talk a bit about how and the problems that we had, so in terms of our experience and how we also handle that. So I can give you an example. So we started, we wanted to have this platform, the very large platform, and we wanted to, so we started with the fleet of buses here in Porto. So if you go out, you can see in one of these buses, there will be this Wi-Fi sign there that is so free SDP Wi-Fi, so the Wi-Fi that we have there. Of course, this privacy issue came on hand because they don't want people to know where they have their buses, which of the buses they have, where, and so on. So this means that one of the things you have to make sure is that or you need to disclose some information, and this information will be important for them, okay, because you disclose the information, but then you are giving them some application, some service that is very important for them, or you have to anonymize all the information, okay? And this is one of the things that we have to be very careful. So we can work with the vehicles, we can get information from them to make all the networks work, but we cannot disclose information that is private for the others. So this is something very important. Actually, in our experience, we had more issues. So, for example, I am a user, I can access the internet in my vehicle, but this internet, I can access the internet in my vehicle, I can access sites in the internet. This goes through a bus, but it can also go through another bus to then reach a roadside unit to the internet. So all of this needs to be secure, because we don't want all the vehicles being able and all the people on the vehicles being able to access what I'm doing, okay? So again, all the security measures, they had to be there by hand, or we wouldn't have the confidence of the people to be able to use it. Even there would be on another side, so these vehicles, they need to communicate between themselves to coordinate the network. They need to give information to each other. I am here, I can access this one, I can access the internet through this vehicle, through this point. Imagine that they tell the wrong thing. So you may have attacks to all these networks. We had also to make measures to make sure that this would work. And of course, with all the data that we are gathering from the vehicles, from the sensors, from everything needs to be secure till the point where we can process it. And the first thing we have to do is anonymize it. Very important.
Okay, on the question, regulation or market, we need both. Firstly, we tend to see regulation as something negative, something which will cut our possibilities. In fact, at least what the European Union is doing for a large part is positive regulation, is putting the money and putting the incentives where they think as European Union that they are, and they are not paying me. They are putting their money and their incentives on the issues which they feel it's important. That's a way of regulation which guides things in a certain way. But on the other hand, even when regulation comes from a restrictive perspective, it doesn't necessarily have to be a wrong thing. I always give the same example to my students. 25 years ago, I was working in the automotive industry. It was the time where regulations were enforcing the use of catalysts in the exhaust pipes of the cars. And in the automotive industry, that was taken as the kind of the worst thing which happened to the industry. It would be lead only to miseries and all problems, and the things would be, the world would never be nice again. And in fact, the fact that that regulation appeared, and it was first in Europe as far as I remember, it created and raised the possibility to make better cars, to make better engines, to really develop machines to a stage which they were not before. We can see the same thing. Actually, nowadays, if we look at artificial intelligence and and mostly at the machine learning and data analytics algorithms that we are using, those algorithms are based on the availability of a lot of data and the availability of a lot of computational power. And if it doesn't work at once, then we put more data and more computational power, and we get very lazy and very dependent on this abundance of data with all the issues of privacy, of bias, and whatever comes with it. I think that putting regulations like the GDPR is trying to create some of that, definitely will lead to better algorithms. We just have to go back to the drawing board and to start again thinking how to design these algorithms, but it will be really an improvement in the kind of quality of the algorithms and of the techniques that we are using now. Another end, looking at the market issue, if we go to the supermarket, we have the choice of buying free-range eggs or battery eggs. And it's up to us to decide where we put our money, where we put our, depending on the kind of campaigns and awareness that we have, that we think that it is worth to pay more for a free-range egg, because we know that that enforces some values which we may adhere to or not. If we have this type of choices in terms of algorithms, in terms of internet, in terms of Internet of Things and so on, it also, we as consumers, as citizens, can choose for the ones which we believe are more in line with our values. So I think we do need a combination of regulation and of market.
Could I just step in on that point? That was very interesting. From the Commission's perspective, obviously, we would like to continue with the situation where we maximize choice, and that if we are involved or required to set rules, that they are at the outer limits. So we did feel that for privacy and personal data protection, the GDPR, we needed to set rules. But of course, there is in those rules, for example, the ability for the individual to opt out. That is to say, yes, you can have my personal data, hopefully in what is in exchange for a good transaction, which is also favorable to the individual. What we want to avoid a situation is that where we pay lip service to privacy by design, but where then the market says, well, that's fine, but I'm just not going to offer you a service which, because of my market dominance, means that you don't get onto the internet. So you can click, I don't want to accept your terms and conditions, and then I don't have the service. So that is why we need, with the NGI community, to be able to have the technological privacy by design, or in fact you spoke about ethics by design as well in AI. It's the same issue. So we need to learn further, create the outer rules, have the technological community with transparency, design the tools, and allow individuals to opt out if they choose to do so.
We also need certification. I don't know myself whether the eggs that I'm buying are free range or not. I believe on the certification of those eggs. We need this type of trust on certificates in order for consumers to know what type of privacy by design or what type of privacy we are getting. We don't want as consumers to go read all those terms of conditions.
So we entered into the second question I wanted to ask, which is about the role of public authorities in a very dynamic environment like the internet, where the markets move very quickly, there is short innovation cycles, and it has an increasing impact on society. And here I would like to piggyback on the question of Philippe Arrojo, the Vice Mayor of Porto. It was the first question of the day, and I would like to ask it to you. What is the role of a city to develop an internet of humans? And I would expand a bit the question. What is the role of technologies to improve the way cities work? And here I would like to start with Antonio, with blockchain. I mean, we hear a lot about blockchain in city, in collaborative platforms. How can we use blockchain to have this decentralized governance inside cities? And in a way, to be a bit provocative, and since Philippe is gone, will we still need a city council with blockchain? And maybe, Susana, you can also tell us a bit about, I was very struck by your movie with all the people and the objects being connected. I mean, immediately I thought collective intelligence. I mean, how can we build collective intelligence with this network of moving things, and what can we do out of it? So maybe Antonio first, you have the microphone there.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Actually, the Internet of Things or the cities are not my specialty, but I will try to say what I believe blockchain can bring. I would like to first start by saying that blockchain is a technology that allows to decentralize many things, But we have seen many decentralized technologies that evolved into really centralized realities. The internet is decentralized, and the web is highly centralized and created monopolies. So at the end, it's not whether technology can bring us to a future that is more democratic, more decentralized. The potentiality is there. But if, as a society, we are going towards that goals. So connecting with the previous question as well, if markets only only put money into businesses that want to create monopolies and do not want to interoperate, that is probably the future we are going to face. And we see that many blockchain projects try to be the new monopolies using a new decentralized technology. So it's probably a society problem, an economic problem, not only a problem of technologies. And as far as we have our principles aligned with ethics, with privacy, with decentralization, and as long as we are able to push forward these goals, regardless the market wants us to push towards goals that maximize their profits, if we go with our values, then we will get to this decentralized, probably not needed municipality utopias or dystopias. It depends on who evaluates that. But it always depends on people. If we believe technology can solve all our problems, we are probably not thinking right about what technology can do.
So I can start with the role of the public authorities, and then for the Internet of Intelligence. So for this, at least from my experience on this internet and next generation internet, I see the public authorities having a strong role in several aspects. So one of them is on the implementation of it. If you don't have a public authority with you, it is very difficult for you to implement it. So I can talk about this experience. So why did we start in Porto? We started in Porto because here we had the openness of the public authority to do it. And if you have their openness, then you can start having the openness then of all the other players in the field. And this was very important, okay? So after the experience in Porto, I had the openness of many other public authorities in Portugal and also outside Portugal. But this one was the first, and it's very difficult to do it. The other part is to implement changes. So with the information that you can have in the internet, and here we go a bit for the Internet of Intelligence. So you can have information about the vehicles, you can have information about problems you may have in the city. So I can give you an example. So we were able to analyze that there was a specific part here in the city that it was always congested, and it was always congested because of the way the lanes were in that part. So if these lanes and if the transit there would be changed, so this congestion could be solved. And the public authorities, so the municipality, they implemented this, and this we were able then to analyze with all this data that things really improved. The other part is that you need to have information of what can really be done with humans, with citizens. And they are the ones that can also tell you, you know, these are the problems we have in the city. These are the problems we have with people. These are the things that we would like to enhance in the several areas in our city for the citizens. So even for all the use cases that you may want to implement, they are very, very important. In terms of all this connectivity that you may have between people, their smartphones, the cars, the bicycles, and so on, one thing that you may think about is that you have information about everything. Of course, anonymized and so on, but you can have information about everything. And this information can give you a very strong power on how to understand people, how to understand the city, so how to understand what everything is working then, and how to use this data to then build services, build applications for all these people. And here AI, so artificial intelligence, has a strong, strong part of it. So you can really build overall crowdsourcing tool with information about all these people, and this can really build, not in terms of connectivity, but all in terms of knowledge, what you can know about people.
Okay, so maybe we can use a Slido now so that I don't monopolize the questions. So we have to read. So it's ranked by likes. Okay. So one question on data ownership. One question on privacy in the Internet of Moving Things. One practical question. Yes, there is this one, there is 0 likes, but I like it because we did not touch the question of, or briefly, Virginia, the question of education. So maybe the question of how can we use the internet to develop indeed the creativity of kids, to develop the creativity not only of kids, by the way, to develop the creativity of everyone. Also, maybe we can look at the dark side. I mean, I guess as parents, a lot of us are confronted with kids permanently on their devices. How can we address these type of problems? Maybe Virginia, you want to step in on this?
Sure. It is not the issue of whether or not using the internet or the new generation, next generation internet to develop the creativity of kids. It is very easy to say the internet will solve it, the artificial intelligence will solve it, but actually it's us we have to, these are our tools, and the internet is not more and not less than infrastructure which we can use to develop creativity or to diminish creativity. And it's easy to think, yeah, okay, we can design internet and then everybody will be all of a sudden more creative, but I think it's much more something which we have to see how we want to use these tools and these opportunities to connect kids. Kids can be connected much easily through the internet now with kids in other places of the world. So but it's not internet which does that. It's us, it's people, which can decide to create this type of links and create these enablers for children to interact with kids in other parts of the world and see what they are doing there, and in that way develop. So it's thinking further than what the current possibilities, and really trying to think outside the box with the infrastructures and the possibilities that we have. And that, I think, is the way to do it, and not sit down and expect that by magic internet will make our kids more creative.
Okay, maybe the first question, which gets more and more likes. So it's about the fact that, so it's this case it's autonomous vehicles, but you could expand that to many other areas. There is an increasing quantity of data which is being created, stored, and which can be processed. So there is one question which is who owns that data? And I would add to it, and maybe I would ask the question to Manuel, how can we exploit these data? So we can take the example of autonomous vehicles or the example of your company. How do you exploit these data? How do you handle this issue of data ownership? And maybe I would also turn to Pearse to tell us a bit about circulation of data, because it's also very important if you want to reap maximum benefits of the data, that they move across Europe and beyond. So Manuel, maybe you want to start?
Well, you actually posed the most difficult question to me. I don't have an answer to that, but the one thing that I find very interesting from the trend that these questions are following and what the other presenters have mentioned in their presentations is it seems that it's very, very hard to avoid a future where even though we have decentralized networks, a few parties continue to be big or start small and grow up to be really big, like the way we have the internet now. So how can we avoid that? Is it avoidable? Because if you think about the internet in the early days, you could say that that was a decentralized network. We had thousands or hundreds of thousands of web pages. But then, in the end, if you build a browser to surf through those websites, you are having a massive leverage. The same way it can happen with blockchain. Even though it's a decentralized network, if you build the browser of blockchain or the wallet to, decentralized wallet to exchange cryptocurrencies, then you have massive amount of traffic and you have leverage over the rest of the players, even though it's decentralized. So that's in the line of some questions there that I thought it was really, really cool question. So, and I found it difficult to predict. And I don't know if it is avoidable. I would like to hear everyone's opinion, because also that is going to give us hints on who is going to own that data, because I feel that what the past taught us is that if there are some big players, they will probably own that data.
Thank you. Yeah, you had to be asked the question first, because the Commission doesn't have the answer either. But maybe a lot of people are happy that we don't have the answer. We did realize, however, that we needed to pose it and have the discussion about ownership of data. So what is said in the question is, of course, that whether it's automated vehicles or any other platform, they're generating and will generate huge amounts of data. Who owns the data? We put forward already more than 2 years ago in a first policy document on the data economy that question, and said that we needed to examine it more. We got a very rapid and strong response, surprise, surprise, from some of the industries whose equipment, including in this case motor vehicles and other automated vehicles, would be generating the data, saying, of course it's ours. And by the way, you shouldn't have asked the question, don't touch, this is something that will be sorted out contractually. Fine. But when we hear about what's being done in Portugal, in Aveiro, in Porto, etc., and when we know about all of the uses that this data, anonymized in most cases, can be used for the public good, for social good, for environmental good, and of course for economic good, because some of these large industries have proven that they are not the best and most imaginative in finding new business cases for actually exploiting this data and creating new value. So given our mandate to protect the individual and their data, obviously the GDPR has to apply. The discussion can't take place unless everybody around the table accepts that, the protection of personal data. But then when we have that as the basis for the discussion, okay, maybe in many cases contractual relations might work, but not when there's a huge imbalance in the economic power of the individual or even the small company compared to the platform owner or the large industrial company. And that's where it comes into it. And there will be cases where there are public policy motivations that will justify intervention. Now, I'm getting to what is close to my point, which is that we have issued a second policy communication specifically on this, and we have stated that we need to have further consultation, but that we need either the industries themselves to come up with meaningful and realistic codes of conduct and proof that their behaviors will allow for the sharing of data, or we will have to envisage further intervention in order to make data available. So we're already saying, first of all, commission research data. That is to say, data for which taxpayers' money is used to fund research projects. That data has to be publicly available. The public have paid for it. Secondly, government data at all levels should be available with the usual restrictions with regard to personal protection and also security. And the third element, which is the most difficult, which is industry to industry, private sector to private sector sharing, that should, first of all, we should incentivize further discussion, but we should consider whether there are certain public policy obligations that we can impose. And the last element is, when can the government or local authorities say to a private data owner, we actually need your transport data or your electricity use data or whatever for a public policy goal. If that's well defined and the data is protected, we should be able to come. There are already parts of legislation, but it is going to be a significant debate for the future.
Thank you, Pearse. So there was a question which disappeared now about decentralization. It was about the decentralization of artificial intelligence. But I think we could turn it into a general question. I mean, we speak a lot about the possibility, and we already discussed it, both Antonio and Manuel, the possibility to have a more decentralized internet, and that probably technology itself will not lead to that. There needs to be political, societal intention to do that. But what would be your view in terms of, yes, making certain key resources a bit more decentralized, accessible to more people? So it can be artificial intelligence, it can be data, and how we can do that. Maybe Antonio, you want to start, and Virginia, we could hear also for artificial intelligence.
Yes, so thank you. I think it depends on what we call artificial intelligence, right? And of course, artificial intelligence is made out of many things, such as the data is used, or the algorithms that we use, or the processing power, and all this can be decentralized. Speaking about blockchain, this specific kind of decentralization that is new, is actually more, it has a lot of ethical issues, and it's a more powerful implications that technology brings. It's not that we can decentralize, so no big tech can control the AI, but that we can decentralize so not even the owners or the people who wrote that code can control it. So one of the dystopias people envision with blockchain is that software is developed on this decentralized network. This software is autonomous from its creators and cannot be held accountable, and it works as it was programmed. And it only can be shut down if you shut down the entire network. So we have this problem of a truly decentralized artificial intelligence that is autonomous from everybody and that cannot be shut down. And it brings us back the ethics issues. Are we willing to go to that future where there are artificial intelligence talking with each other maybe and making decisions that affect our reality without any control? Or we want to have countermeasurements, or we have to have mechanisms of control for this not to happen? So I believe the ethics in AI have a lot of things to say.
So indeed, it's a very dystopic and hard, difficult to fight idea that AI will come and take over the world and do everything and whatever. Firstly, AI is software. Software is a Turing machine for the ones who understand it. So there is a lot of problems which cannot be programmed. So the idea that AI will be able to do everything and anything and we will not have control over it is physically and technically not possible with the technology that we have now. Maybe in some years we have other technology and other worlds, but as we are developing it now, it is impossible for this type of technology to really take over the world and do and become super intelligent and so on. So that's just to put that one to rest, at least I hope. The issue of openness and distribution. One of the projects I'm involved at the moment, we are in the negotiation phase, is about developing an open distributed platform for AI in Europe. It's the AI for EU project, which is just starting, just negotiating now. And the idea of that project is that we'll have a distributed platform to share data, to share algorithms, to share knowledge, to share expertise about AI across Europe in a way that it will enable smaller companies, smaller institutions, organizations to access much larger amount of data than what it is possible now, and in that way to be able to boost forward the development of technology and of expertise in Europe on AI, balancing the large technical companies which do have all the data and all the algorithms at the moment. So that's one of the very concrete initiatives.
Good. So not to be fully digital, maybe we take some questions also from the floor. Yes, there is a question there. I don't know if there is a microphone. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. It's less than a question, but more a reply to Pearse and others. It relates a bit to data and AI and how government, and particularly the Commission, can actually leverage or control or regulate AI and the use of data and that. First of all, AI is nothing without the data. You can't create AI or machine learning or whatever knowledge you want to call it without the data. The problem is that the big companies, by contractual obligations, say, whatever you tell us is ours. It's now changing. It started to change with GDPR, where actually the first time on a regulatory level, the people involved in the process have been identified. And one of the big major steps is that you actually, as the one who creates the data, without your actions within that space of that company or that service, let's take Facebook, for example, their data, you are the creator of the data, therefore you should be owner of the data. That contractual or that societal look at the data is about to change. A lot of companies I'm talking to and involved in are very much concerned about that. The next thing is looking at how to leverage or control AI. Pearse said in the last fourth point, which is very interesting, the move of data from companies to government is very important. In that sense, AI is a very powerful thing. Two anecdotes on that. First of all, on unsupervised learning, it's a very popular, actually a true story, where unsupervised learning was perfectly well in identifying horses in pictures. Unfortunately, when looking at how the algorithm came to be, it was all that the data was botched, because all the data that was put in front of the algorithm had a watermark in it, and the algorithm trained on that watermark on the picture. So therefore, at some point, when you put a picture of a dog with the same watermark to the algorithm, it said, yes, this is a horse. It was very confident about it with 100% accuracy. Now the point is, it's very important that, in my opinion, that government has access to a certain amount of data that has been generated through the use of privately owned commercial enterprises. But in that sense, there needs to be some regulation, at least clarity on that, and I'm very much with you. But please don't employ an algorithm that says where the dog is a horse, in that sense, when government is trying to use data that's coming from private use. The other part, and that's a scary part actually, is the algorithm that actually controls the monetization of videos on YouTube. And if you talk to YouTube scientists and YouTube people who actually work with that algorithm, nobody really knows what it's doing, because this thing is going out of control, and that is posing a real threat. When you have an algorithm that says a dog is a horse, and have that thing have real impact on people's lives, then you very quickly get into the dystopian picture that a lot of people are generating.
Okay, just AI is not about data. AI is more than data. What we see currently is that there is a special field within AI which is based on statistical analysis of data, and that field within AI is at this moment having a lot of success. We are also seeing that this field is kind of picking up all the low-hanging fruit, and we are reaching more and more problems which we cannot solve by statistical correlations between data. So there is much more to AI than looking at data, and we should, and we are in Europe in a very good position to look at all those other technologies and all those other approaches which are much less reliant on data than what the current machine learning, deep learning type of algorithms, which basically are statistical regression over a huge amount of data. Indeed, all those things are extremely brittle, can transform dogs into horses or whatever the example is. It is because we are looking at statistical correlations. And statistical correlations is just one of the many ways that we have to understand the world about us. And if we try to do all of our understanding of the world just by using statistical correlation, we are going to miss a lot. And that's true. And that's why we need to really look at other types of things in order to ensure that we are not so dependent on statistical correlation than we are at the moment. And those are the steps in which within Europe we are very well placed, like I say. There is a lot of efforts at this moment from the European Commission, but also from a lot of other organizations and industries in Europe to look at different ways of doing it. And if we really talk about artificial intelligence, is about, in a sense, and the dream is that we'll be able to reproduce intelligence. If all of you who have children know that a child of 2-3 years old doesn't need 10 million or 20 million images of elephants or dogs or horses to understand what is a horse or a dog or whatever. So we have to really try to go and beyond this idea that AI is statistical correlation and that all what we can do is only to look at statistical correlation, and we'll have much more control over the algorithms because there will be a different type of algorithms, and we will be much less dependent on the data that we have, which is biased, which is difficult to maintain, which is brittle, and we'll solve a lot of these problems that we are creating ourselves because we are completely paralyzed by the idea that we have to solve everything by statistical correlations.
Virginia, just to come back to his question, he said that you could not build AI without data, and you didn't seem to agree. Is that correct? Or?
We can build AI without data. There are many other fields in AI which are not dependent on data. So it is not true that we cannot not have AI without data. We can. And we should be doing much more about it.
Okay, so I think we have a microphone here, so you have the microphone, you can ask a question. Please introduce yourself and be short in the question so we can take one more.
My name is Benjamin, visiting from San Francisco. And my question is just to echo the one that has the most votes up there. What are your opinions of yesterday's European Commission decision? And does it fit into your vision for the next generation internet that you want for yourself?
What decision?
What key values? Which one?
Are you asking about copyright? Yeah. Okay, well, it's because you're American, I can patronize you and say it wasn't the European Commission. There was a vote in the European Parliament yesterday, so the European Parliament gave its opinion on the Commission proposal for a directive on copyright. So if that's the question, then it can benefit actual citizens and small tech companies by creating legal certainty, by remunerating creators and ensuring that they and the press will continue to have proper payment for their work and creativity. And as the President of the Parliament in his speech, which came just before the vote to which that question refers, stated, we cannot have democracy without a free press. So that is a challenge to some business models and practices that many people here are familiar with, in which increasingly we've become loose and free with content that has been created by others. It does not in any way inhibit the growth of new business models or new tech, and it doesn't inhibit creativity online. There's an awful lot that has been said in the lead up to this debate on both sides, and there were two conflicting reports that were actually voted on. But on both sides, an awful lot has been said about what this does or what the Commission proposed. For example, that we would be banning hyperlinks, that you couldn't anymore have snippets or memes. None of those things are true. So it is not an easy compromise, but it is one that will actually give security to those who create. It will give security to those who want to develop new online systems to know what they are allowed to do. And remember that the main attention is focused on platforms, that they must have their house in order, that they in some cases will actually have to introduce some technologies. But individuals, particularly individuals operating in a peer-to-peer basis, will not be subject to those same constraints.
Okay, maybe we take one last question from the floor.
Christian Laranaga, First Hand and Partly Internet Society. It's great to see the Commission here in such numbers. It's very useful to hear what you're thinking firsthand. On that point, I'm just curious to know when the next generation internet will be ready. and we can go and have some lunch.
Well, I think having Professor Pouzin speak to us earlier is a very, very salutary lesson for us. One, to be humble about what we're doing, and luckily we didn't fall into the branding temptation of calling this Internet Release 2 or .4 or something, because clearly there have been lots and lots of internets. And we are aware also that while the title Next Generation Internet may in itself appear slightly grandiose, we think that that at least shows our ambition. The next generation internet will never be finished. And some of the things, including the technologies that we've heard of, could be disruptive, so that even now today we might look back in a couple of years. For example, we work in the ICANN environment, and there is a very valid vision that the next generation internet will be lots of other internets, and that will only just be one way of doing things. So it's continuous work. So I'm taking the serious bit of your question. I too want my lunch, but it is actually a useful reminder that we're in a permanent process, and the only thing that we want to do differently is to make sure that we don't allow great ideas which then become commercialized, which then become themselves bottlenecks or become dominant to the extent that other great ideas and other people who also want to be part of that process are actually blocked from developing their vision.
Susana, you wanted to?
I just wanted to compliment that I usually say that I'm working on the next generation of the internet since '97. So at that time we started with ATM networks and then IP networks. We were considering, oh, this is the 4G of the communications, then the 5G of communication, and all of them is next generation internet. So that's why we are following up.
And just to complement, okay, it is a never-ending story, of course, but it will start. So my colleague Jorge Gassos will explain this afternoon the next calls that we are going to launch, how we want to help real internet innovators to develop products in line with our philosophy of an internet of humans. So maybe a last question and we close. Yesterday evening, Monique and Susana, we were discussing about children. And I was thinking maybe it would be a good question to ask you if the internet was a kid or a teenager rather, and you are his big brother, big sister or parents, and you want to help him grow, what would you tell him or her in a few words? And if we go this way, so Susana, you start, and we go through the five of you.
I have no idea. Well, I actually will say, so be disruptive and don't... Sorry? Yes, buy a new bicycle. So be disruptive and do whatever you think it's important for you to grow. Yeah.
So probably I will bring a message from the Decentralized Web Summit this summer in San Francisco. And it's that internet is a game that should be fun, and it doesn't feel like you are playing others' game. It doesn't feel creepy, like others have the rules. So create the rules of your game and play with the internet. It's all yours.
Suppose I would tell it what I told my kids when they were small. Make mistakes and try to learn from them.
Yeah, on the same line, I would tell him or her to continue to break things, to be open and to be respectful and inclusive.
On the basis of my parenting experiences, I think what I would say to my child, the internet, these are the things which I think are important. And if you don't, try and tell me what you think is important, but certainly I don't know how you will develop. Just make sure that you are true to those things that are important.
Thanks a lot. I think we can close here. So a round of applause for our panelists.